I'm pleased to welcome Phil Campbell, our speaker this morning. Phil's parents were evangelical Christians, so he spent the first 16 years of his life in India. He had his road to Damascus while teaching in northern Saskatchewan as a young man.
Road from Damascus.
Road to Damascus?
It should be from Damascus.
Road from both ways. Sounds like a pilgrimage. Thank you. Like the Apostle Paul, he left the faith of his parents and his youth kicking against the pricks. Discovering Unitarian Universalism was a profound experience. He discovered that religion could still be relevant in his life without God. As a Unitarian, he has served as president of the Unitarian Congregation of Saskatoon and the Unitarian Church of Vancouver, where we met. He's currently a member of Beacon Unitarian. The first reading this morning is The Little Vagabond by William Blake. Dear mother, the church is cold, but the alehouse is healthy and pleasant and warm. Besides, I can tell when I'm used well. Such use in heaven would never do well. But if at the church they would give us some ale and a pleasant fire our souls to regale, we'd sing and we'd play all the livelong day, nor ever once wish from the church to stray. Then the parson might preach and drink and sing, and we'd be as happy as birds in the spring. And modest Dame Lurch, who always at church, would not have bandy children, nor fasting, nor birch. And God, like a father, rejoicing to see his children as pleasant and happy can be, would have no more quarrel with devil or barrel, but kiss him and give him both drink and apparel.
The great folk philosopher Popeye said, I am what I am. Wise words indeed. You may feel that there are things about yourself that you wish to change. The truth is that you will change, whether or not you wish it. And you may or may not like the changes, but you must always accept them as the changes come about. You see, change is for the future, but acceptance is for the past. Learn to accept yourself as you are, this moment, here, now. As the tone from this bell dies down, you may want to spend this time examining and accepting yourself with all your contradictions, the aches and pains, the energy and excitement, the sadness, the weariness, the wonder that you exist at all, and the even greater wonder that you are aware of your existence. Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all convictions, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stone sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. There is a story about a man and a woman who lived in Utopia. Even the climate was so perfect that they had no need of clothes. Not to worry, for there were no sexual perversions, just a healthy appreciation of the human body. They felt no embarrassment about being naked. It was the natural way to be. These were truly innocent creatures. They did not have to work because all that they needed was provided for them. I suspect they were vegetarians and thus did not have to kill. When they were hungry, the vegetables, roots, fruits, and the products of the earth were readily available and needed no preparation to be both delicious and nutritious. What a life. In fact, you could say that there was no evil in this place, no bacteria or viruses to call illness, no accidents, no pain, and no death. Personally, I think they must have been bored out of their ever-loving minds. But there are two more characters in this story. There was one who made the rules, and one who challenged the rules. Actually, there was only one rule. You see, there was a tree in the very center of this idyllic space that had a very special fruit. The serpent, and he's the one who challenged the rule, said to Eve, for that was the name of the woman, that God, and he, of course, was the one who made the rule, the serpent said that God knows damn well that the day you eat the fruit, you will be like him. Is any of this familiar, by the way? What is interesting about this story, and the reason I am telling it to you this morning, is the way in which Adam and Eve would become like God. Now, I have to tell you the truth. I'm with the serpent on this one. You see, the reason they would become like God is that they would know good and evil. God obviously thought that this would be a bad thing because he wanted to keep that knowledge to himself. Presumably, he could not help the fact that the serpent already knew. This classic Judeo-Christian story is said to be the start of a great battle that has been waged ever since between good and evil, a war that would rage across the heavens and the earth. The serpent is often thought to be Lucifer, the mighty and beautiful angel who was cast out of heaven for having the temerity to challenge God. Evangelical Christians see it as a war for the hearts, minds, and souls of humanity, a war that will eventually end in a final cataclysmic battle. Good will, of course, triumph, and those who pick the right side will sit on the right hand of God. The good that prevailed in the Garden of Eden will be restored. The duality of diametrically opposed absolutes, I love that, duality of diametrically opposed absolutes, that is implicit in the story of Adam and Eve, has ruled the Western Hemisphere and the Middle East for many, many centuries. Now, I happen to own a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, with a commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. I had to practice that. It was given to me more than 40 years ago by a young man with a very small ponytail at the back of an otherwise shaved head. I think he thought I was a prospective convert because I had been raised in India. And for those of you who do not know, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the most sacred texts of Hinduism. In perusing it, I do not find a concrete concept of evil, but I do find some interesting thoughts about dualities. This scripture is comprised of the words of Krishna as they are spoken to a military general named Arjuna. They are on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, not far from where I was born. I have been there. The soil has a reddish tinge, and some say that this is because of the blood that was shed on that very day. At one point, Krishna tells Arjuna to be free from all dualities. Later, he says to Arjuna, "O conqueror of the foe, all living creatures are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate." In this respect, and in this respect only, I suppose, I am much closer to Hinduism, a religion of the land of my childhood, than I am to Christianity, the religion of my childhood. The religions rooted in the Middle East reveal a black and white world where everything is seen in terms of dualities. Evil is personified as the serpent intruder into paradise, and eventually as a roaring lion pacing up and down the earth, seeking whom he may devour. In Hinduism, however, the personification is of Kali, who has been described as devourer of worlds and creatrix, lover and mother goddess to creation. On the internet, one person described his dream of her. As I sat in contemplation of the paradox of reality, Kali came to me. I was in awe as the technicolor vision unfolded. It was Black Kali, devourer of worlds. She sat in the lotus, floating, suspended in the void, arms dancing, her tongue extended in samadhi. With an electric pop, her tongue would snap up entire universes. I would see them collecting inside of her like children in the womb. I longed to experience Kali, the goddess of love, eternal creatrix. My wish was granted in an explosion of ecstasy, and I at once understood the destroyer-creator duality joined in cosmic union within Kali. I felt all the multitude of souls from all the devoured universes. What was separated in infinite space-times was joined in the love of Kali. The disintegration of worlds in time allows the reintegration outside of time. It was an experience of the cosmic orgy of being. This is very different from the myth of the Garden of Eden. While there is a reference to dualities, these dualities are joined together in one entity. The God who is the creator and the God who is the destroyer are one and the same. Disintegration and reintegration are essential part of this worldview. The Christian way of defining evil as the antithesis to God, however, begs the question, what does it mean to be evil? What does it mean to be good, and what is the difference? What is the essence of goodness, and what is the essence of evil? Many thoughts spring to mind, all based on polarities of one sort or another: creation and destruction, functional and dysfunctional, love and hate. But for each of these polarities, we can readily show that the one is actually not mutually exclusive of the other. To create, for instance, you must destroy. You must destroy the rock to create the building block. Wordsworth said that the child is father of the man, but the child must die in a sense to give birth to the man. The old disintegrates to become something new. As for functionality and dysfunctionality, they are so contextual that what is functional in one circumstance may be very dysfunctional in another. Having a hair-trigger response to any movement, of course, for instance, may be essential for survival in a war zone. But that same response could kill an innocent hiker when the same person is out hunting in peacetime. I also mentioned love and hate, but they are not the polar opposites we often think they are either. As a counselor, I would often see people who were going through divorce. Some would say, at least now I am over it. At least now I know I am over it because I hate her and cannot see what I ever saw in her. Ever heard that? I would then try to gently point out that they were still as strongly linked to the other person by their hate as they were once by their love. They will know they are over it, if they ever are, when they experience apathy, not hate. I do not mean to imply that there are no opposites. When I was an active counselor and was able to speak to couples before they decided on a parting of the ways, we would often work on the polarities that were driving them apart. One polarity that frequently came up was that of structure and predictability versus serendipity and flexibility. Some people want to have predictability in their lives, and a lack of predictability gives them great anxiety. Others do not want to be constrained by rigid plans and feel that such plans can create a prison. Having their lives mapped out for them causes them anxiety. It constantly amazes me how these people get together. If I am the person who prefers flexibility, my partner's attempts at gaining some predictability make me worry that my life will be so ordered that I won't have a say in what happens. So I will compensate and try and pull my partner my way. I'll go that way. If I am the one who likes predictability, my partner's lack of personal organization causes me great anxiety. And so I will compensate by trying to force my partner my way and into a plan. That way. Before you know it, there is a rush to the extremes of this particular polarity, as each tries to pull their partner their way. This whole process, and this is important, this whole process is driven by fear. Fear that they will be forced into a way of being or doing that is uncomfortable and indeed can be felt as a challenge to their very identities. It is important that the counselor not take sides by picking one of the polarities as being intrinsically preferable to the other. This is not always easy, as counselors often have their own biases. The solution lies not in picking the right side or in determining what is true. The solution lies in deciding what the strengths and weaknesses of each perspective are, and then playing to the strengths instead of the weaknesses. As soon as you start trying to determine which is the best way, you've lost. That is because the objective, especially of course in marriage counseling, is to build a relationship, not determine whose worldview is correct. Life is best lived in the positive tensions between the extremes or polarities. Bear with me as I repeat this thought, as it seems to me that this is the nub of it. This is what I am heading towards in this. Life is best lived in the positive tension between the polarities. When you have God and the apostles on your side and have a conviction of absolute truth, it's very hard to do this. I have come to realize that it is just as hard for Unitarians to do this. As members of a value-driven movement, we emphasize justice and fairness, preserving Mother Earth, speaking for the downtrodden. Many of us have a driving passion for the great causes that we promote. And so it should be. I would not for one moment have it any different. Sometimes, however, we apply that same passion to support our view of what is right and fair in our homes and families, the organizations to which we belong, and yes, to our churches. It can then become very difficult to interpret our own peacemaking covenant in a way that actually leads to peace. When I find myself rushing to one of the poles in a conflict, and that is what my instinct usually drives me to do, I try to ask myself, what is it that I fear? Why am I rushing to this extreme of the pole? Once I have examined this carefully, frankly and honestly, and to be honest with you, I have varying degrees of success at doing so. Once I've examined my own fears in this way, I then ask what it is that the other person fears. This is difficult to do, and I have no real way of knowing if I'm right or not, but it is a helpful way of reminding myself that people are most often acting from their own fears in a conflict, and not out of malice. Most often. Not that, of course, there are those rare occasions where there are malicious people out there. This process does not always lead to perfect success, but it is a way of joining with the other person or people in finding that place of positive tension between the polarities. Another polarity that is a candidate for good versus evil is that of the collective interest versus the individual interest. Back in the 80s, Mr. Reagan spoke of an evil empire. He meant, of course, the Soviet Union, and maybe he had a point. In that state, the collective was supreme, and the individual had very few rights. The pursuit of the purported good of the collective was taken to such an extreme that individual freedoms and happiness were severely degraded. That empire collapsed in a spectacular way under the weight of its own bureaucracy, inefficiency, and oppression, only to be replaced by a corrupt oligarchy. Lest we feel too righteous here in the West, let me say that Western capitalism, emphasizing the rights and freedoms of the individual, is dominant and, some would say, unchecked in the world today. The average CEO, for instance, makes almost 800 times what the lowest wage earner in the company makes. Almost 800. Yet he often makes money by firing people. That's how he earns credit with the board, and rarely has to account for his own incompetence. I say he because most often it is a he, and that also is not right. If he fails or is dishonest and found out, he gets bought out. In other words, he gets more money, because the board is afraid the stock will fall if they make an issue of it, if they take it public. Many of those who were responsible for the crash of '08 made a killing before and after the crash. In one of the most famous cartoon quotes of all time, Pogo said, "We have seen the enemy, and they is us." Are we the new evil empire? In politics, as in so many other areas of human life, our rush to the polar extremes prevents us from living in the creative tension between the absolutes, the tension that is so much more creative and leads to a much more equitable distribution of resources, happiness, and fulfillment. I heard an Islamic comedian on television some time ago, and I don't think anything has changed since then, who illustrated in a humorous way how the media can also rush to the extremes and sensationalize their coverage. Playing the role of an interviewer, he asks an opinion from an Islamic radical. In the height of passion, the man says, "All infidels must die. They oppose Allah and they must die. Die, die, die. Everyone must die." Cut to the interviewer, who says, "And there you have it, folks, the view from the Islamic world." The comedian says, it's like interviewing the head of the Ku Klux Klan, who says, "Papists, Jews, Muslims, and niggers are an abomination. They must die. We're going to place a white supremacist state in Egypt, headquartered in Arkansas." Resuming the voice of the announcer, he says, "And there you have it, folks, the view from the Christian world." The media covers extremes because they fear that they will lose their listeners if they do not. Extremists are driven to their positions because of their fear that the world will not be a comfortable or happy place for them if they do not use force and terror to impose their vision of reality on the rest of us. Wars and conflicts of all sorts, while they may begin up high with greed, are fueled by fear. When we realize this, we can have compassion for those who are caught up in the ideologies of extremism. As a movement, we Unitarians can also allow our fears to drive us to the poles. We see ourselves as the good guys. We are, after all, a church, a religious movement. We see the injustices around us. We see evil triumph as the suffering of the poor increases and ungodly men and women hide under the cloak of religion as they force their reactionary and oppressive views on the rest. At the same time, and by strict coincidence, of course, they accumulate wealth, and the resources of the land and the fruits of the labors of us all are concentrated in the hands of the few. What are we to do? Do we pour out into the streets in protest? We must, for we cannot stay silent. Do we fight? We must, for we cannot stay inactive in the face of gross injustice. But through it all, we must also realize that relationships are far more important than truth with a capital T, or content, or ideology. If we allow ourselves to be governed by our fears, we will find ourselves drawn into opposing camps that are at war, and reconciliation becomes difficult, if not impossible. All humans are our brothers and sisters, even when their humanity is distorted by their fears. Which brings us back to the roots of our faith. Our 7 principles comprise the cornerstone of our faith, and they are based on values, not doctrine or truth. That is why relationship is more important than being right. Being part of an interrelated web means living in context, a gentle rocking back and forth within the tension between the many different polarities of our experience as we connect to many different nodes of the web. We began with the voice of the vagabond, who has some very interesting ideas of how church could be improved. The idea that God and the devil might reconcile, interesting in our time, was positively scandalous in the time in which Blake wrote his poem, and it is scandalous to many still today. Maybe you, like Yeats, wonder if some new revelation is at hand. Or maybe the revelation has always been there in various forms for those who would but have eyes to see. Kali and Shiva, female and male aspects of the one being, or Kali herself, destroyer and creator in one God. The yin and the yang of, I think it's Taoism. The idea of containing the paradox of good and evil within ourselves and our communities is what it really means to eat of the tree that brings the knowledge of good and evil. Ye shall be as gods. The serpent was right. Thou art God.
I'm left with this wonderful image of Kali with her tongue out, taking in whole universes, and that's the good and the evil, and that's a wonderful image, isn't it, of that?
It is. So the comment was that there's this about the wonderful image of Kali with her tongue out in samadhi and snapping up whole universes.
Yeah.
And it's a very visual image, isn't it?
I'm enormously grateful for what you had to say. And I'm reminded, as I sit here listening to you, of readings I've done over the years of Joseph Campbell. And you may be very familiar with his affinity to Eastern worldview. And after that church, I'd like to have a brief word with you because we share a little history. I'm born in Calcutta myself.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So of Anglo-Indian heritage and raised as a Seventh-day Adventist. So we're probably sure about my opinions.
Right. I hope you don't mind reading what I'm saying. I also have a friend here who went to boarding school with me in India and who happens to be visiting me at this moment and is here. So, right, the comment was that there are some closeness to the work of Joseph Campbell, who was a great authority on myth and mythology in the Western Hemisphere of the last century. And I have another sermon that's based a lot on his work.
Would you say that good and evil are human constructs? Do they exist in the animal kingdom?
I would say that it's a developmental thing, that there are primitive forerunners of it in the animal kingdom, some sense of justice and injustice has been shown to exist in monkeys, for instance. There was a fabulous little experiment where monkeys were taught to hand a stone to the researcher and get back either a grape or a piece of cucumber. And they much preferred the grape to the cucumber. Now, if both monkeys got the cucumber, or both monkeys got the grape, everybody was happy. But if you gave one monkey a grape and then gave the other monkey a cucumber, all hell broke loose. So they have a sense of justice. It's very self-focused. But you can see how our sense of justice might have evolved and grown out of that. So,
And yet these were human observers of the monkey behavior.
and as human observers, we bring our biases and evaluations of what justice and injustice are to the whole thing.
And justice and injustice relates to good and evil how?
I do see good and evil as human constructs. And rooted in a particular kind of functionality, but also rooted in some of our genetics and how we are able to work together in ways that go beyond what we really see elsewhere in the animal kingdom. And the universals of most of the religions, in particular the Golden Rule, are about how we work together in concepts of love, and these are the values of most of the great religions, and they're common values to humankind. I think they're rooted in our evolutionary development, both physical and social.
I think we're done. Oh, not quite. Carry on.
Wondering how some of all this applies to the events just south of the border here, where you have one huge weak group, another strong, essentially strong group. Whether how some accommodation can take place.
So the question was, we have down south of the border a weak group and a strong group. Are you talking about blacks and whites? Cops and non-cops. There are many different examples and versions of this, and one way of putting it is the hegemony versus the non-hegemony. The ones that are in control, the ones that versus the ones who are not in control and have to follow suit. What we in Unitarianism would consider to be good is to support the downtrodden in whatever way possible, to give power to the powerless, to create a much greater degree of equality. That is our version of good versus the evil, which is to try and force a monoculture among everybody. That's to Unitarians. That's the evil. Is a monoculture. We want to have diversity, to incorporate diversity within our congregations, within our society, to value it, to treasure it. So you have a different idea than me. We can discuss that. We can and still be friends afterward, and still even love each other afterwards. That, I think, is the Unitarian good. Does that answer your question? Close enough.